So, we guys got we're beginning. Please turn off your mobiles. Last chapter, chapter 2, I actually cover all the sections except the last one. This is section number 8, page 17. So, number 8, page 75. 75, which is called implications. Implications, that's on page 75 if you get your books. And the question is basically, how do we evaluate the overall attractiveness of a country? So, you got the concept of overall attractiveness. And the overall attractiveness is determined by 3 fundamental factors, which we're looking at. Number 1 is benefits. When you look at the country, you always want to see what are the benefits of investing in Cambodia, or the benefits of investing in Thailand, or Korea, or whichever country you want to do. You want to see what the benefits are. Number 2, you want to see what the costs are. And number 3, you want to see what the risks are. This type of analysis in finance and in economics is called cost benefit analysis. In a cost benefit analysis is a type of analysis used to make a decision based on whether the benefits exceed the costs, whether you have more benefit than costs. So, what are the benefits dependent on? The first big important factor is the size of the economy. You want to see how big is the economy. If you're going to be investing, you might as well invest in a large economy. You don't want to invest in a tiny little economy. You want to invest in a country which, if it's large, will give you a big growth potential. So if you invest in China, you're probably going to have a much larger potential than if you invest in a tiny little country. So, size of the economy is very important. Let me see what else. The second important factor is purchasing power. Basically means the purchasing power of consumers. Purchasing power is translated into a simple English of, is it rich or poor? High purchasing power of consumers means consumers are rich. Low purchasing power of consumer means consumers are poor. The example will be Germany and Bulgaria. Germany is considered to have, and Germans are considered to have a high purchasing power and to be, we say now, relatively rich. And Bulgarians have a relatively low purchasing power, and we're considered to be relatively poor. So, ideally, you'd want to invest in a country that has a relatively high purchasing power. In other words, you want to be in a country where consumers can spend a lot of money. That makes common sense. For example, Korea, people have a lot more money. Hong Kong, people have a lot more money. Singapore have a lot more money. So these represent very small size of the economy, but a large number of rich consumers, a large number of millionaires. Okay, so that's number 2. And number 3 is economic growth. Economic growth is how do you expect purchasing power to grow over time. Example of what, let's say, I think I know, is that economic growth in France is going to be very poor or probably negative for a long, long, long time. So, French economy might be relatively large in Europe. What is it, number 2? Purchasing power of French may be relatively high, but the economy isn't going to be growing over the next 5 or 10 years much. More likely the French economy will be steadily shrinking. So the economic prospects or benefits aren't as good. Now, on the other hand, the Russian economy is relatively larger or relatively large. The purchasing power of people is relatively poor, but the Russian economy has a better prospects for growing than the French economy. Same thing for the British economy. Very poor. We call these growth prospects. We can even write economic growth prospects. Prospects relates to the expectation of future growth. All right. So, other things that are part of this section in here, page 76, will be, let's write it in red, it's a fundamental concept, called first mover advantage or advantages. First mover advantages, these are the advantages that accrue or that benefit someone who enters the market first. For example, iPhone has accrued significant first mover advantages because they were the first to develop the smartphone, so-called iPhone, that now many of you use. And many people got early on hooked onto iPhones. Now many users would possibly even see that, let's say, the new Galaxy, the latest Galaxy models from about a year and a half ago are vastly superior to the iPhone, but many old iPhone users still continue to buy iPhone 4S and still continue to buy iPhone 5 just because they're iPhone fans or simply because they've never tried. They've never tried the alternative. Nevertheless, it's an advantage, and for example, if you got some new, let's say, 2 brand name pizzas like Pizza Factory and Pizza Outlet, I'm making the names. The first one that comes in a country and develops a brand name, consumers will be more familiar with it and will be more comfortable with it. Also, if you're the first guy, because you are the first guy, the market is just blank, empty. You can grow a lot faster. So, in many ways, there are many, many first mover advantages. However, or the opposite we call late. Late mover disadvantages. If you're already a second, if you're already a third, you have some significant disadvantages. And the disadvantages relate that you are already fighting up against a familiar business, up against a familiar brand name, and so on. Example of a first mover advantage in my home country of Bulgaria will be the German metro, which all Bulgarians are perfectly familiar with. And many years later, when the French Carrefour opened, Bulgarians haven't heard of Carrefour. They don't know it, okay? They're not comfortable with it. Yeah, they may go to it, but they all know Metro because they've used it for 5, maybe 6 years, and they're very comfortable with it. They know it offers good prices. They know it offers good quality. They know it serves them well enough so they don't need to go to Carrefour. They don't need to switch. And this is exactly the logic of someone who's been using iPhone for 2 years. Say, hey, iPhone works perfectly. I don't need Galaxy, okay? So the idea is that sometimes when you're late, you get a lot of disadvantages, and sometimes if you're first, you get a lot of advantages. And the idea when entering a foreign country, well, when entering a market, any market, including a foreign market, is to develop what is known, I'm still back on page 76, sustainable advantage. I'll just shorten it to ADV as advantage. And sustainable advantage is one that a business has the capability and possibly or hopefully the strategy to maintain in the long run. So sustainable means being able to maintain it in the long run, or at least in the mid-run. So Metro for many years had a sustainable advantage in the so-called hypermarket business. These are the huge supermarkets. In Germany, you call them hypermarkets too? Yeah? I don't know. So in English, we call them hypermarkets. All right. So these are some of the basic benefits. Now, what are the costs? You Metro want to come to Bulgaria, you can't come for free. You got to pay. You got to pay bribes to the Bulgarian government. You got to pay, well, not the government itself, to the government, pay taxes. You got to pay bribes to politicians, okay? So, almost everywhere in the world, you will face corruption. The lowest one is considered to be in New Zealand, to be fairly clean and fairly free of corruption. Relatively free of corruption will be considered Nordic countries, especially Norway, Finland, Sweden, will have relatively low degree. I mean, they will be, but it's tiny, tiny. It's not going to be a big problem. So, corruption is number one. Number two, you want to open business? Try it in Bulgaria. You're going to find out, well, that's why we're poor, that it's a nightmare. It takes a long time. You got to go through a lot of paperwork, a lot of waiting time. So you got a lot of legal costs. And if you're a foreigner, they'll make you wait twice longer. Why? So you want to pay a bribe and get things done quicker. And when they pay a bribe, they do get done a lot quicker. All right? That's how it works everywhere in the world. And if you're a big foreign business, things are going to be so slow to you until you start paying bribes. And here's the key: to the right people. That's the hard part. You will be paying bribes. The question is for you as the businessman to understand and find out who are the right people and what is a reasonable bribe. Okay? You don't want to be paying millions where you're going to pay $500,000 or $250,000. So you're going to have a lot of legal costs on top of corruption. So what is corruption? Corruption is basically illegal costs. So you got a bunch of illegal costs, you got a bunch of legal costs. Part of the illegal and legal costs, it's not in the book, but in economics, we have just time. You will be wasting time. So you're going to be wasting here. These two costs come under the category of money. But you're also going to be wasting a lot of time. Things just get slow in poor developing countries. Okay? And let's see what else. And another problem which is relatively common, especially in developing countries, doesn't apply to Germany or Korea. You're going to have infrastructure costs. So, you want to open a mine in Mexico or Peru? Well, there won't be a road. You'll have to build the road. You'll have to contract with the government and pay extra money for the government to build road for you. You won't have electricity. You'll have to contract with the government to get extra electricity in your case. Maybe in a developing country, you won't have access to your mobile, so you'll need to communicate with the telecommunications company that, hey, we're going to be having business here, so that they have a special cell for you. So you will have sometimes, not always, but you're going to have sometimes extra infrastructure costs in a developing country, which you will not have in a major advanced developed countries like US, Germany, or UK. So this is where a lot of the costs can get very high if you're trying to run a business in a developing countries. And these costs can get huge if you're trying to run, let's say, an oil business, where you got to get the oil from the ground and you got to run it through a pipeline. And a pipeline, let's say 1,000 kilometers or 500 kilometers pipeline, will cost many billions of dollars. And if it's pipeline through the cold, it can cost 3 or 5 or 10 times more. If you got to go through the tundra, okay, through the cold, frozen air. So these are some of the fundamental costs. Let me see. Costs. Yeah, that's pretty much it. So now we go to risks. And political risk. Well, you do guys have a political risk associated with political instability. Just 2 years ago, we had a revolution in Egypt. In 2011, during the so-called Arab Spring, I was teaching and working in Bahrain. And in Bahrain, Bahrain got its own revolution, which started at the so-called Pearl Roundabout, where we call them now, well, they call them revolutionaries, going up against the government. And you go nearby Pearl Roundabout, every day you're going to have a lot of blood, spilled blood. You're going to have a lot of people who are wounded and so on. In other words, the country is agitated. The country is on revolution. The university just shut down. They say, hey guys, we take 2 weeks of vacation, meaning no classes, no nothing, and just show up once a week and check your email to see when we resume classes again. Well, if you're a business, it's extremely hard to do business in an environment where you got a revolution. We sometimes call this social unrest. You have meetings, you have burning, you have violence, okay? People can go, they can hit and burn cars or shops or all the other things. So you got all sorts of political, sometimes they call it civil strife. And this is fighting between different groups, whether it's for rights, for politics, for power. You may also have part of political risk, and we can put it separately, as in religious risk, where you got one religious group fighting up against another religious group, okay? And they're fighting, like in the Arab world, Sunni up against Shia, okay, for example, could be. I mean, Ireland, Northern Ireland, Southern Ireland, you still have some religious type of problems, but it's all under the category of political risk. Another type of political risk is...
Sorry, what's the word? Strife?
Strife means
Strife.
fight, battle, fight, battle. It actually means conflict, conflict. So it could be religious conflict, could be on any other reason. Yeah, well, yet I'm remembering, I just came over here in May, and in June, in my home country in Bulgaria, right in the middle of the capital, right in front of the parliament, you got thousands, probably tens of thousands of people who are protesting against the government, against whatever. The recession, or against the depression, or against whatever they might be. So you got fundamental instability. And so the middle, the center, the downtown of the capital is a little bit blocked. So if you're a banker, you're cautious if you're going to work to the bank, when you're going, how you're going, you know, you're watching if you're going, and all the other things, you're careful. So again, all of these are fundamental political types of instabilities. And instabilities create or cause risk. Another type will be nationalization. Nationalization, of course, the textbook example will be, let's say, politicians, new politician who is a populist, like Hugo Chavez comes and says, we don't like the American companies, and we're going to take their companies, make them our own. In other words, we're going to nationalize the company, and basically it's called expropriate. To expropriate means to take someone else's property forcefully and make it your own. Nationalization is the government taking private property into its own hands. Okay, the opposite is privatization. Okay, so they will nationalize, and you're going to lose almost everything. Well, who would you think will be considered in the books, and especially in the media, in the Western media? The evil will be considered Russians and the Russian government and Putin. And they say, oh, the bad, evil Russians, they, we made major investments. We bought oil, Russian oil. We built the factories and maybe the refineries or whatever it is. We're extracting the oil. And the Russian government is coming back and saying, well, it is ours now. Well, the Russian government says, you guys aren't paying taxes. Maybe true, maybe false. Or they say, well, we got environmental requirements and regulations. You're not satisfying environmental regulations. Therefore, we take it from you. Or the next government comes and says, you purchased this for 2 billion or for 20 billion? 2 billion is nothing. You must have paid 100 billion. That was unfair deal. We canceled the deal, okay? Well, what is it you're going to do? You're going to send the U.S. Army in Russia and have a war? We're going to send the U.S. Army in Venezuela to have a war? Or this is what Iran did. Iran nationalized a while ago American and British oil companies. What? You're going to send the army? Well, you send the CIA, but that's a different story altogether. The point is, governments, when they get in trouble, they like to nationalize, or when the political wind changes, they will nationalize. Sometimes the government gets a whole lot greedier. Example, let's see, is my home country of Bulgaria. We got gold. Well, gold is in the ground. And of course we, because we're, well, that's why we're a poor country, we are incompetent and incapable of digging our own gold from our own ground. We are bringing some foreign companies, and there was Dundee Precious Metals from Canada. They checked in, yeah, there is gold. They say, okay, it's going to cost that much. They did already a bunch of work. They say, we are ready. You know, they started a little bit of work. They spent a big chunk of money. And then the next Bulgarian government comes back and says, oh, what? You're going to be paying only 2% royalty? No way. You got to pay 10%. Okay? Something like that. And then they says, well, first, that's not fair. I mean, we had a deal for 2. We spent a lot of money because we had 2. If it's going to be 10, we don't want to be here. And the Bulgarian government says, well, you got to pay 10%, otherwise it's not fair. Well, guess what happened? Dundee made the calculations, and if it said, if we're going to be paying 10%, it's not worth doing it. And they left. Well, guess what happens now? Nobody's working there. There is no gold. There is no job. There are no jobs. There is no money. There is nothing. Okay? So, Bulgarian people lose. Bulgarian government loses. Dundee Precious Metal loses. Everybody is a loser. Well, I mean, the gold is still in the ground. Maybe 5 or 50 years from now, we're going to get a better government, right? And that will be, you know, done. But for the moment, Dundee Precious Metals had all of its costs and all of its expenses, and everything they did was just a pure loss, because a new government that was hungrier and greedier came along and said, no, no, that's not good enough. Or pay us big bribes. Okay? Question?
The nationalization thing.
Yeah?
Like you mentioned Iran with the oil companies.
Yes.
Do they do it in a legal way, or do they force?
Well, you got to understand, because they are the government, from a national point of view, it is always strictly legal. The question is whether, according to international law, it is legal or illegal. Most of them do it according to international law is illegally, okay? But the government doesn't care, okay? The government is hungry, the government needs the money, the government's got, let's say, 5 million government employees. You gotta feed those employees. You got 20 million waiting for welfare money in handouts. If they don't get the welfare, tomorrow morning there will be a revolution, all right? So, since the, the 1860s in the United States, 450 years, this Saturday, America was at the one point close to a revolution. Did you read about the possibly coming revolution in the United States? And what would Americans revolt against? I mean, they're all nice, good people. Well, guess what happened? There was an electric glitch, and electricity wasn't working in the system. Well, which system? Is there a problem if a city, there's a problem in electricity in a city? The whole nation's going to go and revolt and bring down the government? The answer is no. But if there is an electric problem in the system, which makes the payments for Social Security to 50 million people, so you've got a little card, and that little card, when you go, you can buy with that card food, which is money given from the government for you to buy food and other basic necessities. If that card is not working, you're hungry, you got no money, you got no resources. In other words, out of 250 million people in America, 50 million are poor, and they depend on that card to go on Saturday night and do their shopping for food and other things. So if the system stops for a couple of days, people are going to revolt to bring down the government. for whatever reason, even though it's just an electricity glitch. So they were quite lucky that they were able to get it done within a day, because by Monday they would have been a revolution. Back to the point. The point is, governments need to make payment to a large proportion, maybe 30, maybe 40% of their population. In the Arab world, as much as 60% of the population. And if you stop the payments today, within a week or within a day, you're going to have a revolution, okay? So governments will do whatever it takes, and they're going to grab money from wherever they can to keep the government bureaucracy running and to keep the people on welfare going. In other words, to keep the country going on. Legal or illegal, they don't care, okay? The only thing they'll care is, will the other side send the army? If you're Iran and Iraq, will the one country send an army into the other country? Okay? Is there going to be an immediate war next week? Maybe that's the concern. Otherwise, they don't care, all right? It's the governments. So, nationalization is a significant risk. You also have another very important risk that will be, let's say, for example, Germans and French in Bulgaria. We call these anti-business sentiments. Example, Metro coming in Bulgaria, they made huge investments, tens of millions of dollars. They got the jobs, they got the shops, they got the goods. And while the economy was running good, everybody loved it. And when the money was coming in, meaning coming from Germany to Bulgaria, we all loved it. Well, guess what? The recession came and jobs began to shrink, so there was no more benefits from jobs. Well, if you had a recession, Germans aren't going to be investing anymore. It doesn't make sense to invest. But Metro is still running huge profits. And when you run huge profits, of course, they're going to send some of those profits back home. Let's write a special term in finance, in English, to repatriate. To repatriate means to send back to your home country. In this case, they continue to repatriate profits, meaning profits which they made in Bulgaria are sending back home in Germany. And suddenly, 10 years later, Bulgarians are waking up and say, oh, there's no benefit of money coming in. There's no benefit of new jobs. But they are taking our money, right? They think of profits as our money, and they're shipping them back to Germany, and we're losing money. A nice way of saying it is the Bulgarian economy is bleeding, okay? It's bleeding capital back out of the country. So when capital was coming in, they loved it. Now when capital is moving back out, they suddenly hate it, and they say, stop the bastards, we can't do these things. They can't take their money back, okay? They gotta keep the investments in. Suddenly, you have the population beginning to hate the situation, and they all want to turn back against Metro, against Carrefour, and against Bila, and against all of those major corporations, or we call them now retailers, all of those major retailers. So the point is that sometimes people love it, but sometimes the whole nation, the psychology changes, and suddenly the environment, the country, the nation turns against you, and they get to hate you. Again, I'm not saying it is right, and I'm not saying it is wrong, okay? I'm not saying it is fair, I'm not saying it is unfair. I'm just stating what the reality was and what the reality is. If you're a businessman and the country goes up against you and you suffer a tremendous loss, let's say 5 or 10 million, it doesn't matter whether you were right or whether they were right. It doesn't matter whether it was honest or dishonest, okay? All it matters is you lost a lot of millions of your investment, and maybe you can recover your investment back, maybe you will not be able to recover it, okay? So, anti-business sentiment. Okay, you also have a bunch of economic risks. And economic risks usually run two ways. The one way is the business cycle goes down and you got the overall macroeconomic risks. Here, the risk is associated with economic mismanagement, when the government is incompetent, which in our own case in Bulgaria they are, when the government doesn't know what they're doing, when the government thinks that it's doing okay, but in reality completely messes up or destroys its own economy without them understanding or knowing. Because most of our politicians, you gotta understand, they're not well educated. They did not get education in the US or UK or France or Germany. Most of these rose out of nowhere. Maybe they're just some entertainers on TV who decided to change from TV entertainment, like singing, to become a parliament, a president, a politician, okay? So, these people, you don't expect them to be smart, you don't expect them to be sharp, you don't expect them to be competent, and you should always expect them that they mess up the economy. And they do it all the time in developing countries, okay? We don't have these fail-safe mechanism and all the other stuff like advanced democracies that have run for 100 or 150 or 200 or more years. So economic risks are always present. And finally, you can get legal risks. And legal risks are basically risk associated with a failure to safeguard your property. For example, you might be metro, but we got mafia, okay? And if it's mafia up against business, it is not clear who wins. Or it is not clear how much more money you gotta spend to defend yourself against the mafia, the local mafia, okay? Or against the local government or corrupt government politicians who will ask for bribes, although bribery might be here in the political risks and political costs. So, the point back is, when you're providing or doing a cost-benefit analysis, you should be looking at the various benefits. You should also look at the various costs, but you should never forget to look into the different risks. And the less developed the country, the higher the risk. The higher the political risk, the higher the economic risk, and the higher the legal risk. The more advanced the country, the more developed the country, the lower will be risks. For example, Bulgaria will be a very high-risk country, and Sweden will be a very low-risk country. Again, Greece will be a relatively high-risk country, and Singapore will be a relatively low-risk country, or New Zealand will be a relatively low-risk country. And based on all of these factors, you determine the overall attractiveness. Questions?
Yeah, with the legal risk, why is the mafia a legal risk?
Well, mafia is a legal risk because it is the law which is supposed to protect your property and property rights. And the law runs into legal and police enforcement, okay? So within police enforcement, you will consider it legal risk. Or legal risk could be another type of a legal risk where you are metro, you have some claim or problem with the local supplier doesn't pay, you go to court, and when you go to court, the Bulgarian court will side with the Bulgarian company and will judge against the German company. They like to do that a lot. In Thailand is well known, and not only Thailand, is well known here in Asia, that when they have a local Thai company up against a foreign company, they will always judge against the foreign company. They'll always side with the local company. So that's a type of a legal risk where, one, the court system is not going to work at all. Number two, it may take 3 or 8 years for the court system to work. Number three, the court system will work, it will work okay, but the judge will not be fair and honest and would love to rule against the foreign countries, foreign company. You gotta understand, in every country, they don't like foreigners. In most of the cases, they would hate well, they love their money, but they hate the foreigners. That's the common nature. I lived in the Middle East, and in the Middle East, it's the same sentiment. They just don't like Westerners. They don't like non-Muslims. They don't like non-Arabs. And in most of the cases, whenever there is a problem or conflict, they will always side with the local national and not with the foreigner. The foreigner is considered to be always at fault. So that's a case. And in the case with the mafia, hey, the courts are not doing much and the police isn't doing much. So this is part of a legal risk. And that's how we like to classify. That's how we like to qualify. It's related to the protection of property rights. And the mafia violates property rights. And that's why it's considered to be a legal risk. Good enough for now? Right? Okay, finish, 5-minute break.